Good afternoon and welcome to SSN Leadership Talks. This is our fifth episode in 2018. As you know, it's a 20-minute Q&A every Thursday at 12:30 Eastern Time with an industry leader. Today's leader, we have Chris Peckham, who is an industry consultant. Welcome, Chris.
Hello.
How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Good. So we're going to talk a little bit about Chris, and then we're going to get into the industry. All right. So the first thing is the program is Leadership Talks, and my first question is always, tell us about your leadership style.
My leadership style. I try to make sure that the team around me is solid with what they do, is able to take care of the tasks at hand and want to expand and that type of thing. And we set up with a common set of goals and make sure everybody understands what those goals are. And then they deliver. Try to stay out of the way, support when it's needed, whether I think it is or whether they ask for it. But it's all about collaboration and moving it forward with those goals that everybody understands.
Excellent. Okay. You were CIO for Henry Brothers, and then Senior VP CTO for Kratos. You've got a PhD in electrical engineering, MBA, and an XYZ. I mean, you got it all. Give us the elevator pitch on Chris, and what's your area of expertise?
Yeah, I think you covered the elevator portion for the academic side.
Okay.
So it's there. So yeah, electrical engineering, and then the background over the course of life has been a mix of engineering and IT work in some form or another, mostly system integration on the IT side, business process analysis and pulling things apart and putting them back together, and an operation component, pretty large operations component that ties into the IT side. So, IT in effect is really a tool. How do you use the technology to make something better or make something easier? Definitely try to make sure that when you're done with whatever you're doing, it's an easier process than it was before you started. Not one just to put technology in place to put it in place. There has to be some deliverable at the end of the day that allows it to make a difference and make the business better or whatever you're working on better or easier. So, yeah, that's the semi-short elevator pitch, and we'll go from there.
Okay. I think you probably agree that the world of integration has changed. Give me a rundown on the role of the integrator, the specifier or consultant, and then, of course, big player today are the IT folks. And then if you can, tell me what, your view of what's the CSO versus the CSIO. So,
yeah, I'm going to forget all that stuff.
You what?
I said I'm going to forget all those, so I'm sure you can remind me of what's missing, right?
No
so
worries.
We're talking about the integrator first, I guess. Was the first piece?
Yep.
Yeah. So the integrator side, I think, has changed quite a bit over the course of even the last 10 years or so. There is a piece where in the past it was just get whatever was there on the specification and be able to put it together. And again, part of it depends on what market you're dealing in, whether it's bid spec or whether it's negotiated or you're in with a customer that treats you as a trusted advisor. But there's definitely an aspect where it was a lot simpler in the past to some degree. I guess everybody says that as time moves on, right? But sure. There was no network involved. There was no IT staff involved. It was a bunch of coax and some cameras that tied into whatever was recording. And you started putting the network and the IP stuff in place, and it changed the dynamic of what was going on with it. So the integrator's job has gotten a lot more difficult in that area because, again, there's more things to understand, to do correctly, and not leave exposure and a risk factor involved, right? So over time, like I said, it's gotten a lot more complex with what the expectations are and what they can do and how they have to interact with the customer. What was the next part we were talking about there?
Well, just taking on the other forces, the specifier and consultant, and then.
Oh yeah. So Yep. So the specifiers, again, I think a lot of that depends on how the bids are coming out and where the relationship is. And that's like anything else. There's definitely an influence that all of the big players, all the OEMs or the manufacturers want to have with the specifiers, and they'll get with them to make sure that their stuff is included in some form or another. Some markets, they have more influence than others. That could be whether it's a vertical or a geographic area. There's some guys or industry firms that play differently. But there's definitely a factor that comes into play of how specs are put together from the AECs. The fascinating thing about all of that, and again, you can look at some of the bigger projects that come out, is sometimes they don't stay up to date. So they may be specifying something that's the same boilerplate that they did on something that was 3 or 4 years ago, and the technology has come by so much more advanced or more detailed that should be there, or it works differently even, and they haven't updated it. So that whole relationship can be a challenge for the integrator and for the end users, for that matter, with how all of that stuff comes into play.
I'm gonna jump in real quick because my next question was, and we're gonna go back to the CSO versus CSIO, but you just touched on something like the pace of technology growth is quickening, I believe. Is there any secret sauce formula for speccing today's technology in a 10-year project or even a 5-year project at this point?
I think a part of that is very, very difficult. There's aspects of things. So, let's take our traditional 3 legs, right? You have, I guess that depends on who's defining the legs, but intrusion, access, and video. Intrusion stuff for the most part, it changes very slowly. There's aspects that you can do a little differently, and maybe we're talking stuff that's in the residential market. There's things that you can expect to do on your phone with mobility that may not work necessarily the same way on an enterprise side. But for the most part, the intrusion technology moves somewhat slowly, right? And on access control, you have people that are successfully running access control systems that maybe stuff changes on the controller because, or not on the control boards in the field, but the controller in the IT area, because you got disks or servers that have to be replaced, that type of thing. But the panels and such, you could put stuff in that, as long as it's meeting its primary goal, we won't go down the card or the mobile access piece, that type of thing, right? But that's just a reader thing. But as long as it's meeting its functionality and it's doing its thing, you don't change it. On the video side, you have to do it every so often, and that replacement cycle is a lot less because of where it runs and how it runs, and the cameras don't necessarily last as long as a reader and that type of thing. So it's difficult to go 10 years out. You can definitely go a little less than that with the horizon. But you also have the challenge of all that, Tim, of what the customers are looking for, right? Some of them are very, very forward thinking, and they want to do the latest and greatest thing that they see at one of the shows. And you have other ones that are very, very conservative, and they want something that's worked the same way it's worked for the last X years, and they never want to touch it again, right? So there's that mix of who's there. So it's a challenge, to say the least. But I also think that there's part of it that goes to an open dialogue. It depends on who's owning the relationship of who's putting that stuff together. If it's collaborative work with the customer, and the consultants actually understand the technology that's there and what's possible, and they know what's not on the knife's edge and the bleeding edge, then it's a little bit easier to meet expectations, and you can actually set that roadmap. But again, it depends in all that and how it puts together.
Talk about the customer, the CSO versus the CSIO. What's the difference between them? And, talk about that for a second.
I think part of it is a title difference. Part of it is who is it, right, at the end of the day. Part of it's the company and how they've defined it. Part of it is who was in the chair. He or she could be an expert in one aspect of it. They could be some type of risk factor can be in it. And the guy or gal may be a lawyer, and it ends up being a lot of risk analysis that goes into that particular department. So that's changed over time, right? So you have the whole split of where those roles stay and what they're doing. So the chief information officer traditionally has been the person with all the IT systems, whether they're internal or external facing, and it could be everything from desktops to the servers to the phones to the whatever it may be. the chief information security officer. Again, sometimes it depends on the firm. They define that as the person responsible for the network security, and maybe you have the risk in there for that aspect. Maybe it's somewhere else with and under the lawyer, even could be under the law department, right? So there's that mix, and then we've added over time the physical security aspect of that. So now you have somebody who maybe is running a shop where that convergence has truly happened, and they're looking at security from both the physical side and the cyber side, and then it's under one umbrella. But you again have the challenge, again, depending on corporate governance and how they've set up and how large they are, and what they're looking at with risk factors and how exposed they want to be. Do you have the same reporting structure? Does the person that's responsible for that one aspect reporting into the individual that is responsible for actually maintaining the stuff? So you have a little bit of a conflict, possibly, depending on what's going on and what type of industry is and that type of thing. So in the end, like I said earlier before I started in my long-winded definition, a lot of it's dependent on the industry and the players that are there and what they're actually looking to do and solve. So there could be a difference, but a lot of times in some firms it could be a mix, or it could be just how the reporting structure may be.
Okay. I want to get into technology here. I guess first talk about AI and where the industry is with it, and what about its future use. What's your opinion? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think part of the AI example depends on who we're talking to there, right? It's who's marketing spiel, right? It's amazing and fascinating with what that whole area is doing. And again, part of that is dependent on how we're defining it. Is it true artificial intelligence? Is it machine learning? Whatever it may be, but it's pretty amazing what you can do with it, and it also ties back into how analytics were defined years ago, and some of the more some of the products that were more in the forefront of that years ago were actually using some basic training. They weren't calling it that then, but they were putting together with the large data sets that they had in those systems and were doing something. So it's definitely there. There's a lot of press that was out semi-recently where some of the high-end graphics cards, you couldn't get them anymore because people were using them for whatever they were processing on that side, right? So a lot of it was on Bitcoin, but at the same time, that processing power is needed to do some of this stuff. And it's in play. It's definitely going to impact what's going on. And a lot of it, you can just see how it will help the operators in managing alarms. You have something that's going to look at something that stands out, as opposed to trying to monitor everything all the time with just staring at a bunch of screens, which hopefully isn't the way anybody's doing anything these days anyway, right? But, it's there, but that technology is definitely going to help the end users on just taking a look at what the norm is. And again, however you're doing that training and looking for what's something different. And the other thing it can help with is classification. Fascinating example from a couple of years ago. There was actually a vendor that was using it in the video space, and they were actually able to tell the difference between 4 different types of antlered animals. So a moose, a deer, an elk, and there's always the 4th one I forget. But they had actually trained enough where there was something running around on the mountainside. They could tell what it was, which I thought was kind of silly, but at the same time kind of cool.
Yeah,
so it's there and it's going to work.
Okay. I have a few more questions. We've got, we probably have about 7 minutes left. So I want to talk about robotics. I want to talk about cyber, and then one more question about the integrator. So give me 1 minute on, robotics and the role of robotics in our industry. And I see you enjoy Robotics Business Review. I'm not even familiar with it, but talk about robotics.
So it's one of those things. I'm going to define it before I talk about it real fast. And it's really the combination of what you have on the ground and what you can fly. So I'm going to combine the drones as well as the stuff that may be on tracks or on wheels, right?
Yep.
Okay. And I think that overall there's a place for it. But I also think it's what are you trying to do with it? And then how serious are things? So it's a way to extend your guard force. It's a way to extend your presence. It's a way to also look for anomalies that may be out there, just like we were talking about with the previous question with the AI portion of it. So it's a way to do things that you can't necessarily do things now. You can throw a drone up on a tether, and the FAA is not going to worry about it too much. Easier than one flying around on its own with some of the controls that are needed. But you can throw up on a tether and you can look around a crowd or over a geographic area with very little thing, and it'll just extend. Think of the camera on a mast, right? You also have the things that have tied in with AI that do things automatically, and they'll know where home is and where their patrol is supposed to be and go from there. On the ground, again, they're extending where you can go, and they do some neat things. You can do things in parking lots. You can do things around the property. You can put them on random guard tours. So, I mean, it ties in. I do think that there's a challenge right now with the pricing and what the expectation is on how it gets paid for and who owns what, and then you got all the maintenance and all the other things that tie back into who's supposed to take care of the thing. But it definitely has a place, and it's gonna be part of the mix.
Okay. An important word that we're hearing every day: cybersecurity.
Cybersecurity.
I know it's near and dear to your heart. So talk about it and where the hell are we?
We're not where we need to be. And also, I think let me take a step back real fast. It's how do you define it? It's one of those things that means, it's one of those words that means something different to everybody. There's some great standards that are out there of how things should be secured. And one of the challenges in our particular industry is you have all of these, I'll label them as sensors, but all of these end nodes that are out there, whether it be a camera or a board that's controlling your access control system, or even your servers, where you can run code, and then is it running what it's supposed to run, or is it running something that some bad actor put out there? So your exposure factor on all of that is pretty large. Goes back into the risks of what could happen to the business, or what will happen with your security data. So again, all that stuff has to be analyzed and reviewed as part of your structure. But the overall piece on cybersecurity is somebody's got to take care of it, and somebody needs to be able to take care of it. You can tie it back to your phone as an example, right? They have to be passed on a regular basis, and you see those updates that are coming on over-the-air type things. That's still not worked out on the industry to some degree on how things are supposed to be patched. So how long should a manufacturer keep things up to date? What's the expectation on that? Is it the manufacturer's responsibility? Is it the integrator's responsibility? Is it the end user's responsibility? And at the same time, if the manufacturer stops supporting a device after X years, is that understood when you first buy the camera or the device? We'll ignore that one for a second, but what are you supposed to do with it? Are you supposed to throw it out and replace it with a brand new one? Does the customer understand that when you're selling it? What are the expectations? If you get hacked by something and it's taken over, who's liable for whatever happens? There's a large impact of that's again, some of that stuff hasn't even been explored yet. We won't even go down the path of what exactly cyber insurance allows you to do or not do. But it's a huge area that's been drawing a lot of attention. A couple of years ago, it wasn't anything discussed, or it was poo-pooed. And right now it's being taken pretty seriously, but it's what's the integrator doing? What are the manufacturers doing? Or do they have their own cyber programs? Is it rolled out to a customer? How's it rolled out to the customer? And then is there staff available to actually do it? Because there's some technical nuances that are a little bit more than just plugging something in and moving forward with it.
Right. And where's the responsibility fall, you think?
I think it's a mix. No one is just because you buy something from somebody doesn't necessarily mean that you are taking on all the responsibility. And just because you sell it doesn't mean you're absolved of those responsibilities as well. So it's right. All three of those parties have to have some responsibility in the mix.
Okay. So with maybe 2 minutes left, what advice would you give a young integration company? And then what advice would you give a well-established integration company? Thinking about where
let's see how quickly I can do this, right? So on the young side that's there, it's eyes open with what you're doing. Make sure you have an understanding of where it goes. It's a great industry. There's a lot of growth potential. you can have a lot of great interaction with the customer, and there's a lot of different things that you can do to move it forward. So, just that's the case, and take where it's got to be. On the guys and the companies that are more established and up there, take responsibility for what you're doing. Make sure that you use the new technology that you can possibly use, and that you understand what's going on with it, and just be a good citizen to what's going on with it, in the sense of what's possible, and that type of thing with what's deployed. And again, do what's right by the customer, and make it all better.
In general, do you think integrators are slow at adapting new technology? You look at cloud, and what are integrators doing with that today, and are they slow or not?
I think some of them are more the smaller guys are a lot more apt to trying it out, or whatever it may be. Some of the larger ones are more difficult. It's there, it's here, but at the same time, you have the issue of where your revenue comes from, and that revenue stream has been set up for years and years on project-based work, and moving that over to some type of monthly recurring revenue with cloud model. It changes where the dollar goes, and that's not the easiest thing to change.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, anything you want to leave with our viewers and readers about the industry?
We could talk how much more on these topics and others. I mean, it's a great area, and a lot of things to move forward with. And like I said, it's always something new. But I've appreciated the opportunity to talk with you today, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you at our TechSec event in Florida, February 26th and 27th. And yeah, appreciate your time and your expertise. So thank you, Chris.
Thanks again. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Yep. And we'll see everybody next week. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.